Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us today on our 100th show. As always, I am very excited, but maybe even a little more excited today to introduce our guest to you. But first, let me tell you where you are. You're watching Truer MU. This is where I get a chance to connect with you on the things that excite me most about learning, music, writing, the arts, anything that strikes my fancy that I think you'll also find interesting. You can find me on YouTube at Truer MU, or you can go directly to my website at acole.net, acole.net. As always, there is a story. I was on I was on Facebook. And my friend Steve Espinola sent me a link. And in the link, there was a testimonial of sorts from a man named Chris Rael. And this is what it said. I wish my work had left a deeper imprint on the zeitgeist, not because I'm important, but because it was transformative and could have given the world more happiness and beauty if it had been heard more widely. But I was an aesthetic outsider, and that was not my fate. None of it matters. Soon enough, all those who missed it will be as dead as me. Now, Steve and I Steve and I had been talking about our work. We're both songwriters and whether it mattered what we did. And so he sent that to me to say, hey, look, here's somebody else. And I got curious. So I looked to see who this person was. And I saw that he had had a very illustrious career and he'd been on NPR and Rolling Stone had talked about him. And I thought, well, he's doing okay. So I sent him a message say, hey, you're actually doing okay. And he was kind enough to respond. And I said, maybe I should get this guy on the show. And then I started to learn about him, and that's where the fun really began. And so today we're going to talk to him, and you're going to get to know him also. But let me give you just the basics right now. Chris Rael is one of NYC's most prolific veteran composers and the founder of the pioneering Indo-pop group Church of Betty. He has produced dozens of multi-band bills for Fang Records. He has numerous awards that he's won for his work, and he's collaborated with, among others, Annabella Lewin of Bow Wow Wow, Kurt Smith of Tears for Fears, and pop visionary David Byrne. Chris Rael, thank you for coming. Welcome to our show.
Thank you for having me, Adam. It's so nice to be here.
It's great to have you. I can honestly say that when I met you, I didn't know anything about you and wasn't a fan. Now I am a fan after having spent some time with your work, and I'm just thrilled to talk to you about it.
Well, thank you so much. That means a lot to me. Everyone, anytime we connect, you're right, or you know what I'm talking about. It's like every time you connect, it's like each one, it's kind of sacred, because it's like humans, right?
Well,
Yeah.
you've broken the ice with Church of Betty. Well, I want to continue to talk about some of these things you did either before or during Church of Betty. Let's go ahead and talk about Church of Betty. Church of Betty is something that I think not nearly enough people know, but the people that know, I think, love it. And it is, I'm going to summarize it for the audience. It is a conglomeration of Indian, as in from India, music, and American rock, pop, rock and roll. And it's a fascinating combination. In no way is it pastiche. In no way is it mockery. And in no way does it take itself too seriously. And yet, it does have plenty of humor and self humor. And it's, meta. It thinks about itself. So there's lots in there. It's very genuine. It's a very genuine mix. And I'm just very taken by it. I think it's a big success what you've done, and I'd really like to hear all about how it came to be.
Oh, well, thank you so much for saying that, man. Well, it kind of started. It started because when I was in my 20s, like I had like ants in my pants. I just wanted to travel everywhere, and I my brother and I were really into like hiking and like rock climbing and stuff. So we made a plan to go to Nepal and trek in the Himalaya, and en route to there, I went through India. Actually, I spent time there before my brother came over, like up in the far, far north of India, in Ladakh, which is the area which is like sort of a cousin of Tibetan culture more so than the culture of the subcontinent. And uh, going from Ladakh down, I met my brother in Delhi. We started towards Kathmandu. I spent time in Varanasi. which is like one of the holy cities of India on the Ganges, and I just fell in love with it. So it was like really kind of like it was kind of like meeting somebody you want to date in a bar or something, more so than me getting interested in Indian music and then moving into it, you know. So I just really liked it, and I knew that I wanted to spend more time there and go back, and I got very interested in the music. So I when I came back to New York. I ran down a Hindi professor at Columbia University that I didn't know. I just thought, "Wow, do you know somebody that could tutor me in Hindi?" I was already like too old to be in school, you know, and she was like, "Well, you know, actually, I kind of don't, but if you promise to keep your mouth shut." I will allow you to surreptitiously monitor my class if you want to come to my class.
Nice.
She, yeah, she let me do this. It was amazing. Her name was Fran Pritchard. And while doing that, I met a woman in her class, and we became a couple. And she was going to Varanasi to study in like a college abroad program. So like I just went over with her, and I lived with her over there. And I found teachers. I found my way to teachers. And I studied vocal music like raga with a very great master named Balchandra Patarkar. And I studied sitar with a man who is like one of the prominent sitarists in India now, Rabindra Goswami. And then I just started going back like every year, like for whatever time. These were the days in New York City where you could like leave a job, come back and get another one, or a job would like let you leave and come back. Now it's like, it's like can't really do that as easily
Yeah.
because yeah. So like I was exposed to it, and there's so many different kinds of Indian music too. So like the folk music really got me because it was like more like sort of like square rhythms that were more akin to like Western styles of music as opposed to the kind of fleshed out, very obtuse like rhythmic structures of raga, which are super complicated and not intuitive to a Western ear. And I always approach my studies with the intent of learning from my teachers and using what I learned to apply to my own composition, as opposed to becoming, a performer of raga, which if you really want to do that really well, you should like start when like you're a kid and just like you know, live there your whole life, like, you know,
That's what
uh
they do. The
yeah.
best. That's what they do.
Yeah. And my teachers understood what I was doing, and they were supportive of it. They were so cool. They were so cool. They were so great. My Guruji, my singing teacher, it was like my fifth grandparent, and he died in 1998. I miss him. And I'm still very close with my sitar guru. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
so I know enough about Indian music to make a fool of myself. I have a real love for it. And I have, as a music education person, I did study it, but not enough to really understand it, only enough to say, wow, that's cool. And I'm going to listen to it on the radio any chance I get. So
Yeah.
I can act as an intermediary between you, a highly educated person, and somebody who maybe knows nothing about Indian music. And let's use Church of Betty as the medium. If people go to listen to Church of Betty, they're going to hear some things that are very familiar and sound like pop music and rock music. And then they're going to hear some things that sound really weird and they're not going to understand where they come from. Can you help us understand what you are doing in Church of Betty that is not American that you have put into this American framework?
Well, I think some of it just kind of comes as a default aspect of working with sitar and tabla. The tabla, the hand drums, are it's just a different structural approach to how to execute a rhythm than what you do on a drum set. And I think like what's going on in Church of Betty that really makes it work is Well, for one thing, my tabla player is one of the finest tabla players in the world, Deep Singh. We're still close friends. You know, we don't play as much as we used to, but we're getting ready to go out and bother a few people again soon. Uh, Deep is able to create uses an instrument to create like Indian rhythm that's like really super well meshed with like Western rhythms, and like really the core of Church of Betty that really made it work was the collaboration between Deep and our drummer Jonathan Feinberg, because John is a brilliant musician and both these men have like just incredible ears and taste, and they figured out how to play together in a way that I've never heard any other tabla player and drummer do. You know, so like everything was built on top of that. Yeah, also using the sitar. The sitar is not like a guitar. In that you can't chord on it. The raga is notes in a scale over tonic. So like uh, the kind. I think like a Westerner. I am a Westerner, and like writing Western music on the sitar, it's going to push you towards certain types of melodic structures that would not come out of somebody messing around and experimenting on a guitar. You
Mhm.
know, so I would say Betty is like sometimes when we were like really out and busy, like I would have people go like, well, you say this is Indian music. I'm like, oh, that's not Indian music. It's not Indian music. What it is Western music with an Indian accent.
Yeah,
More like that. Because the structures also besides raga, there like and the folk music's from all over the country, like Bollywood, like all of the film music and stuff like that. That's them kind of doing what we're talking about right now in the other direction. You know,
fascinating. Yes,
you know,
yes.
yeah, you hear some like cool old Bollywood song from the 60s or something, and you hear like sort of like James Bond style spy riffs, stuff like that. They're just doing the same thing. The whole, you know how it is, man. Like the whole world is just one giant beautiful ripoff.
When I'm in the Indian restaurant and they got the movies playing and they're playing that music, it never occurred to me that I was listening to Indian takes on American music.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I mean, not all of it, but a
Sure.
heck of a lot of it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so let's take this one step at a time. There's two elements you've mentioned and one you haven't. The two you've mentioned are drums and sitar.
Mhm.
Imagine Deep is playing tabla, but not with you. He's playing in India. What's going to be different about what he's doing there for what he did? You began to mention it in terms of approach or physical approach. There's something you mentioned about the approach to the rhythm physically. I'd like to know more about that and what he changed to play with you.
Um, I I think probably the best way to answer that is to say that he really didn't change a whole lot of what he did at all. He just figured out how to do it. He figured out how to integrate it, and also the band, because he's like such a monster, like when the band would often react to what he was doing and we would come and play to him. This is the beauty of a group, like when everybody's reacting to what everybody else is doing,
Mhm.
what the people in Church of Betty were reacting to was different and very exciting for all of us, and I've I've always had a really good nose for finding not only incredibly talented people, but really talented people who are incredibly nice and collaborative. Like everybody. I I love every single person that's ever been in the group, and the group's been around for a long time. It's a long list of people at this point, but like it was a very collaborative type of an endeavor to arrange these songs. Like I would write parts for uh like we have like basically the core of it was like sitar and tabla, guitar, bass, drums, like at the heart and then I arranged a lot of strings. I love strings, and there's like a lot of strings and Bollywood music and stuff like that. And I'd have some, very wonderful string players who have played with me for a very, very long time. A couple of them are coming in for my new thing. And I would write all of those parts in detail, and they could help me voice my contrapuntal ideas to whatever was going on in the rest of the song. And also I've always valued singing and singers. Most of my players are like good singers, so that we could do like the foundational uh, part, the rhythm with from both cultures, with like lots of strings and then lots and lots of voices. So there'd be like a big singing thing and then a big response back of like four or five thundering voices and response and stuff like that. We did a lot of that.
So
Yeah.
this is true integration, as opposed to the idea of like I have a band and I want an Indian sounding track on my album, so I take some Indian elements that I've heard and just kind of incorporate them, put them on top. What you did was you put the Indian elements at the core, and then you integrated your American or even Western ideas around them, and then interwove them and allowed yourself to change based on what you were experiencing from the Indian music to create a very interesting amalgam that is very strong and very, what's the word? Um, the word would be honest. You know what I'm saying?
Well, thank you. Thank you. Well, yeah, I think one thing that I feel very proud of with Betty is that our little cocktail, our little recipe or whatever is like authentic, like it's organic. It's
Right,
like
right.
the two that's it's fine, for any group to, borrow from a style of music that they're, turned on by. That's awesome. I'm always supportive of that. Like I just got so specifically focused on this and did it so much for so long that it's like just a really thoroughly organically integrated, foundation that's unique to us, and so I feel good about that.
Talk about George Harrison's song "We Were Talking" from Sergeant Pepper. Uh, do you feel that that is a authentic attempt to do what you were doing maybe 20 years earlier, or do you feel like that was just tacked on?
I oh I think that I think it's an authentic attempt. Absolutely, absolutely. I think that George pursued that with a full heart, that there wasn't any uh, motivation other than love of what he was doing. And he had access to like the greatest music making resources in the world, and he did an excellent job. It's funny though, because I'm a huge Beatle fan, like I kind of came to it late. Like my parents didn't listen to them. I found my way into them like in the mid 70s, after they were broken up and I was a teenager. And as much as I loved him, I was like least interested in George's Indian stuff. Like those were the tracks that I would like put the needle over to the next track, or whatever, and like later, when I was doing this, people would be like, "Oh yeah, you must have really loved the Beatles, huh?" I'm like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, I did, but that's not where this comes from,
Yeah.
like, yeah."
That's valuable to know. Oh, okay. So the element that we haven't yet talked about is your singing. This is the thing, if anyone listens, that they're going to be, if they know nothing about Indian music, that's what they're going to notice, that your singing to an unprepared ear is going to sound crazy. It's going to sound like you're whining or screaming. You're hitting microtones. And like I say, this could be instant parody. It could be awful, but you really know what you're doing. This is an actual attempt to integrate and amalgamate an Indian style of singing into this, and it works. Tell us what did you learn over there about singing? What is this style that you're doing? What are we hearing?
Well, in my studies with my Guruji, like he was teaching me like fundamentals of how to perform raga, and I think it's just kind of like what you're hearing there, Adam, is like uh sort of a it's like the accent that comes from the practice. It's just I did it so much and I paid such careful attention. I was like very committed, and it just kind of became I did it so much that it just kind of became like a part of my body, really. I would never usually like vocally in a composition, I'm thinking very much as a, as an American, as a Westerner, and I'm trying to design the song like it feels to me like in my own head, like I'm just singing like a rock and roll song or whatever. And a lot of that like bending and the long held notes and like the microtonal touches and stuff. Um, it's just like muscle reflex from having studied it for a decade, and then as you move into things and you find the things that you like, and then you might choose to use that technique in another composition or something. Yeah.
So just for our audience that might be thrown off by the word microtones, let me try to give a brief explanation. On a piano, from C to C, there are 12 notes. And we don't tend to play in between those 12 notes, but there are notes in between those 12 notes. And different cultures use those places in between those notes. We use them in the blues. We use them, for effects, but we don't tend to stay on them. They tend to be places that we hit and then get off immediately for an effect. This is different. This is actually landing on some of those notes at particular times. And it sounds to a Western ear like someone is either deliberately being awful, or it sounds like they don't know what they're doing a lot of times. Like you're off key, But of course, after you've listened to Church of Betty and realize that it's not a mistake and you do know what you're doing, you get used to it. So help people understand, what are you doing with these microtones? How does this work? How are you singing off key in a consistent, intelligent way?
Well, like if you move from one note to another, like on a guitar, you can go like on a sitar, the frets are raised, so you can kind of bend it, so you can go right, and it's like that space. It's basically just touching all of the space between where you are and where you want to go. And like the training is to be able to control that because it's not uh, done in Western music.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's like basically like kind of like learning how to just never take your hand off of the instrument, when you're moving from one space to the next, one note to the next.
This is consistent with what you said about simply being physically in the music.
Yeah.
That you're fully present to such an extent that you're actually like traveling through other dimensions in a way. You're actually moving into different spaces physically, and it's manifesting through your voice.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Yeah, 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 yeah. I think that I agree with that. I agree
Oh,
with that.
good. Yeah. Well, excellent. It's really neat for me to hear. And like I said, I was inclined to initially think this has got to be a joke, but it only took about two tracks for me to change my mind on that. And it's wonderful. Let's talk about the albums. There's a number of Church of Betty albums. I have now heard every one that I have access to. And it's a fascinating journey. There is a difference between the early albums and the later albums, but not much. I want to say for the record that there is a consistency from your earliest records to your latest records that is rare. Most bands tend to have an arc, and you can hear the development. They're better at some things early on and better at other things later, or not.
Yeah.
Maybe they simply decline. There is It would be very hard, except for a couple of elements, which I'll mention, hard to determine which are the early albums and which are the later albums. They're all very consistent. They may have different approaches, different themes, you might be able to tell that you were in a different place, but quality wise, really very little. Here's what I noticed, and you can tell me how on I am. The early albums are more punk, and the later albums are more pop. In the later albums, you could actually say, hey, that might be a hit. If the audience was a little more, accepting, this could be on the radio. This has got the hit thing to it. And the early stuff is more like, I'm poking you. This is punk. I'm trying to get you, you know?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm because I'm so all over the place, like I've kind of make like circles around myself a lot. Like when I was younger and I didn't think I could play, I was trying to do like experimental things, and the first couple of Church of Biddy records from like 1989 and 1992, like West of the East and Kashi, those are like really progressive records, and they're very dissonant. Like I love dissonance. I really love dissonance, and had a lot of dissonance, like also this was in my early years in India. I would like take a tape recorder and I would just record everything that was interesting to me. And then I would use those recordings in atonal sound collages, which there's a handful of those on those early albums. And it's interesting because the when I did those, the downtown New York progressive people like really, really loved them, supported it, stocked them in all of the stores that had all the weird music, and stuff like that. And like later, when I started doing more of the more like clearly rock rooted stuff that you mentioned, they, they got mad at me. They're like, "We don't like you anymore." It's like, okay, fair enough.
In
Yeah.
Search of Spiritual Junk Food seems to be the turning point where it sounds more produced and more accessible, but for my ears, no less adventurous and no less interesting.
Thank you for mentioning that one. Actually, I was just about to say that really so much of these feels for these different albums that we're talking about like are really the collective product of the people who are playing with me at the time, and like my like the first one is basically like a solo record. I just made it, I just overdubbed a zillion things myself. I can't play the drums, like, and there's like no, not much drumming on there except for a couple of guest tracks. And when we got to junk food, I had a new rhythm section. This pair of guys, Jonathan Feinberg and Joe Quigley, and they are just monsters, monsters. And I had Ed Pastorini of a group called 101 Crustaceans, like one. He's widely revered in my uh, downtown New York musician world, as like he's God to us as a composer. He's just a genius, genius, and a very, very edgy, dissonant pianist. And then Jan Kotic from the Mommy Heads, he had been the drummer in the first version of the group, and then he became guitarist, and he was out of his mind, So they're like all these people ready to just push it to the limit, and I think junk food is probably the most instrumentally formidable thing that we've done, and it's like has so much more to do with these other guys than it does with me, like I mean I arranged the music, but they they uh they just did incredible things and just took it someplace beyond anything I could have ever imagined. Then like later in the later years, like after Deep got into it, then we like really started trying to make it, earwormy, and
Yeah.
we started trying to play to people more, like trying to touch people, as opposed to just, doing our exercises to see what we can do. Then it was like, okay, now like we want to try to touch people a little bit more, and so the group still had like all of that skill, and the talent, but it was directed a little bit more like we kind of turned it a little bit more of a hippie love in then.
Yeah, that's a really gratifying explanation of your arc. That really does ring true. And that's interesting. And I'm also glad that you were able not only to be in the band as fully as you could be, but also not get in the way. Because sometimes, band leaders, they can halt a band's progress through the force of their personality. And you seem to have avoided that trap.
I thank you for saying that. I've always tried very consciously to not do that, and a lot of it just has to do with how much belief and enthusiasm you have in the people that you're playing with. You know, like if you have like some great person, who can do like amazing things, and you just want them to be able to do it. So then you kind of sit down and go, okay, how are we all going to do that at the same time? And it's really about that. Yeah.
I want to talk about your first album again, the West of the East. There's a couple of things that I noticed that it sounded similar to me, and I wanted to just check to see if that was on your radar or if it's just a coincidence. The first is I'm a big XTC fan, and my favorite album of theirs is English Settlement. And it wasn't until I started listening to Church of Betty that I said, oh gosh, English Settlement's a pretty Indian sounding record, and I never noticed before.
Wow, that's one of my favorite albums in the world, man. We're on the same page there, and they are absolutely a huge influence on me as a composer, and they inspired me to really push myself in exploring my own ideas. And they're totally, totally in there. Like I never. Actually, it's interesting that you hear Indian stuff in them, because I never really uh, uh, dialed into that so much. I was more like trying to do things like they did, but with Indian instruments.
Well,
So
that album we should mention is different from all the other albums of theirs. It's my favorite. I love all their albums, but that one for me is a whole step higher because there's something in the nature of the collaboration that's happening there. There's some freedom in there. There's the way it's produced and mixed, and uh, and interestingly, I mean, I always thought of Andrew Partridge's singing as just being his style, but when I think about it now, he's going, just like you're doing, and I don't think he was attempting to be an Indian singer, but did you hear him before you went to India?
yeah,
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 so could be
yeah.
there's
He,
just a
he
little of
was
that in there.
he was in there. He was in there for me like long before I showed up there.
Yeah.
So they both it all stays, right? Like it
All
all
right.
stays. Yeah.
The other band is a band, well, I don't know how many people know this band anymore, but I did love them. The Dismemberment Plan. Are you familiar with this band?
I'm not familiar with the dismemberment plan.
This is just such a wonderful band. Three guys. It's like they're just yeah. If you got a couple hours, just go listen to some of their records. They
Okay.
were, crazy, crazy, crazy musicians, and there's just sort of a organized chaos thing to them where, all the tracks were just crazy, crazy times and things like that. And, but they were just it's a strange combination of I'm about to go over the cliff and I never once lose my step. So there's a jangly spot on combination to it that is just hard to beat. And I did feel a little of that in that first record, but clearly it's a coincidence. So I can point that to you and have you listen to them. They're long since disbanded
Oh,
now, but
yeah, I'd love to check them out. That sounds great.
okay. Uh, let's see. Um, I think that's all I have for Church of Betty, except for I'm curious to know why you went on a long hiatus between the second to last album and the last album that I have. You got a new one coming out, you said.
Yeah, well, we haven't recorded it yet. I'm looking forward to recording it down the road. Actually the new lineup of Betty has not all been in the same room yet.
Oh,
So
wow.
like, we're just really kind of getting it, rolling it out of the garage again here. Actually, we're going to do our first show. It's up like 99% probably be like May 10th will be our first one
Yeah.
after years.
And where will
Yeah.
that show be? In New York City?
Yeah, New York City. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, caveat.
Yeah.
But yeah, but the lineup kind of like our the top of the bell curve for us was like 1998 to 2003. And then a couple of us moved out of New York, and I made a couple of solo records, and then like I got involved. I wrote a musical.
Arabic.
Yeah, and that took a few years. So like I was like making music. It just wasn't Church of Betty music.
Yeah.
And
Do you want to
then
talk about Arabic?
oh sure.
Okay, let's talk about it.